What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Stand Up. Today's topic is going to be about the difficulty of estimating software builds. And it's not a trivial topic. It's something that we're confronted with on a daily basis. Folks come to us, the active projects, prospective customers, they come to us and they say, estimate how long this is going to take. Estimate how much this is going to cost me. Estimate where my problems are going to be. All sorts of things that folks want an estimation of. Everybody is, you and me too, we're always a little weary of ambiguity. But you and I went climbing last night, as we try to do at least once a week. I think you're doing it a little bit more often than I am, that's for sure. And last night, the topic of estimation came up as it relates back to rock climbing. And the irony of estimation in rock climbing is, well, if I've done that route before, I'll tell you exactly how it's going to go. If I've done those series of moves before, if I've solved that problem before, I'm going to tell you exactly how it's going to go. I know exactly how much energy is going to need. I know exactly how it's going to be solved. I know the moves. I know the efficiencies. I know the shortcuts. So estimation as it relates back to rock climbing, which is largely just problem solving or finding the way from bottom to top, beginning to end. Estimation in climbing is only as good as your experience climbing that particular problem. But just because you've been climbing for, 30 years, just because you're a very strong rock climber, doesn't necessarily mean that that translates to the next project. It also doesn't prevent force majeure. Things just happening on that route that you've climbed 1,000 times and it just goes wrong. The hand pops, a chip flakes, something happens.
Old breaks, yeah.
Old
It happens
breaks.
not all the time, but it happens.
Right, gear pops, like shoe fails, whatever. Stuff happens. You may even underestimate. You may even underestimate that route that you've done or that software build that you've built dozens of times. Like, we talk about login and authentication and the things that you have built 1,000 times over your career. Still ways to step in shit. Still new ways, new, single sign-on solutions, new, widgets or ways that people would like to utilize that thing that, hey, if I've done it before, I'll solve it right now. So I want to make today's conversation about the difficulty of estimating software. And I want to kind of relate it back to, obviously, to our climbing scenario, but when a customer comes to us, either prospective or existing, and they usually are coming to you, Mike, and they're saying, I want to build X. Can you estimate time or money? How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost me? And you and I have built our business entirely around alleviating the stress of making estimations in ambiguous problems. But it is possible to estimate software, and we do provide estimates. And so I wanted to hear a little bit from you about your methodology when you're confronted with a problem and somebody asks you how long or how much. How do you go through providing an answer?
Yes. So you bring up a great point. The easy things are the things I've done before. And the challenge in estimating software is the way that software scales, unlike building a house, is if I've built it before, the time it takes to build it again is nothing because I'm just copy paste, right? Like, and now with AI, I'm like, I have a whole bunch of solutions that are effectively copy pastable that I didn't even build. I mean, effectively, that's what's happening, right? It's been trained on a bunch of different problems. I'm piecing them together. So I've gotten pretty good at this. If I look at a scope and I can see, hey, this is just a bunch of components there's nothing novel about this. Right? It's like a Levitt house. I'm putting together Levitt houses. And most applications that people want us to build, or a lot of them are like these, what I call CRUD applications, right? Create, read, update, delete. They read to a database, they write to a database, they update from a database, they delete from a database. And it's really just moving data around. And a lot of times it's like spreadsheet turned into software. Give me a UX around this that isn't Microsoft Excel. And those are the easiest thing in the world, especially today, to kind of build, estimate. Sometimes I look at those and I think of that as, like you said, the climb I've done 1,000 times before that's well below my physical limit. I mean, like you talk about like free soloing, right? Like I don't need the rope, I'm fine. Like bar a eagle flying in from nowhere and attacking me on the wall, this is not going to be but like a hold could even break and it won't even be a big deal because the hold's on the other sections are so big, right? So these are the easy estimates. And when you've been in agency for a long time, you're going to have a repertoire of stuff like that that is going to make estimation easy. Most agencies operate in this way. The reality, though, is that's only a small subset of the applications we end up building. Most people are coming to us as a startup and looking for a software agency with some kind of a novel idea. And it's in an increasing rate, they're coming to us with something they don't really know how to build, and AI isn't giving them a good, or they've gone on Replit at this point. Like they've gone to Replit and tried to one-shot it. It's not working. There's something complicated about the build. And this is the tricky piece of running an agency. So the agencies I worked at for many years, the larger agencies before starting my own, the estimation process went something like this. You'd have a bunch of calls with a client, you develop some kind of a list of features, and then you, as a developer, as a lead dev or head of technology, you'd either sit in on a few of those calls, and then you'd get this list from like a producer, a digital producer, and they'd say, okay, I need you to put hours on it. And you'd basically look at each task and be like, this is 80 hours, this is 40 hours. And you'd be doing, I tried all different things. At some agencies, I had like a menu of like you talked about authentication in this platform. I tried to come up with rubrics for this. It never quite works out. Effectively, what you're doing is you put the hours, you add them up, and then you add like some kind of a multiplier on it, which is like your margin for error. And then you end up going back to the customer with it. And then there's this almost like used car sales process of them trying to figure out exactly, everybody knows this, right? So it's them trying to figure out how much fat you slapped on top of that thing. And you hope by the end of the negotiation, by the time the signature hits the paper and you build the whole thing, that at the end of that, you're going to turn a profit, that your estimate was right or at least off. But here's the reality. When I went and did this agency thing for myself, I realized that big agencies are overcharging by a large margin. So they're giving themselves, because basically you're never under budget. You're always over budget, and there's always more software to build than time or money would allow. So you might be a small agency owner looking at us now, which is where we were, because we did the same exact thing. I did the same thing I did at every other agency, except because we didn't have the reputation, our rates were much lower. And you're off, and you find that, and then you learn the dirty secret of the big agencies too. They lose money like crazy on projects. And we've heard horror stories of people having to eat budget for a year or longer for projects that they said this would be done by this date with this amount of time. It wasn't, and they just have to basically eat it, or you go out of business, right? Or something of that nature. This begins, if you end up in this situation like we did, you have two choices. You either go to a pure time and materials basis and you say, this is my estimate, but this is based on this time and materials, and if it goes over, you got to pay the overage. The issue with that is it's very hard to grow like that, because you're basically in this cost plus methodology when it comes to, and you really can't get to value-based pricing doing something like that. So as an agency, that's not a great model. And you still, the other dirty side of this is you end up saying you're agile because that's a buzzword, but you're basically operating in a waterfall methodology all the time, which we know absolutely does not work for building great software. Software is very different than building a house in that we have a bunch of assumptions, and through the development journey, those assumptions get challenged and changed all the time. Even with a perfect Figma, I could guarantee you that your software is not going to look like that Figma at the end. And even when you do get it to look like the Figma at the end, when people really interact with it, all the things that sort of made a ton of sense when you were looking at that design on a big screen from far away or clicking around because you had this idea of the customer in your head, all that falls apart and you end up needing to adjust the scope. So all that is to say is estimation really possible? Not really.
Not accurate.
Not accurately. I think that developers are also notoriously bad at estimating because they think about the time spent on keyboard and not all the time spent thinking about the problem in the meetings, the testing,
The toilet time.
there's like this vortex that happens that they just underestimate by a large margin, and it's just very, very hard. Even when you have time cards and things like that, there's like things happening at the same time. Was the person distracted? It's very hard to actually get this right. So What did we do instead? Because
Well,
I just said,
I want to
yeah,
ask a
go ahead.
question first, which is to the audience. Dude, if you're dynamite at estimating, I got to meet you. Like I want to know if you are estimating in the way that we are saying from our experience doesn't work without just slapping a huge amount of fat onto some random calculation, please share your methodology. Like that's important for the world to know. Like if you're effectively operating a waterfall estimation, like dude, share the secret sauce. It didn't work for us. It never worked for us. We would go largely upside down even by putting padding in there. So how did we build differently, Mike?
Yeah, well, we first is we kind of we hired a mentor that talked to us about software. We focused specifically on delivery. We didn't focus on estimation. We started looking at how do we start delivering better software, and we learned proper agile, not just agile in name, right? So we got rid of the buzzword and we learned to do proper agile. And in proper agile, and I'll give a shout out to, we've never met, but I like, Alan Haloub's account. I follow him a lot. He's big on the hashtag no estimates movement. I'm a believer, man. Just from following him, I learned a ton. We learned a ton from some other mentors as well. The big thing that we learned is you can't really give an estimate. We went by this methodology of demos over deadlines, right? And the idea is you don't say what's going to be done. You don't gaze into the crystal ball. You say, this is what we have completed up until this point, and this is what's up next, right? And you do these iterations as quickly as you can. So I was always used to this idea that you had to have a 2-week sprint. That was everything that I had always been taught in software shops that I had worked at. And then from following Alan, he was like, you could do a sprint, you could do a 1-day sprint, and so I was like, okay, like let's do that. Let's make the sprint like we're going to complete these 3 things and then we're going to show them to you. And so so one thing I noticed that eased a lot of client anxiety throughout a project is just showing progress continuously.
How do we
And
do?
well, I like Loom as a video. One of the things is as the way that I work and the way I teach my team to work is you need to work in a vertical slice. And what do I mean by that? There's the front end and then there's like the back end of a project. You need to build vertically through the feature so that you have something to demo. So for example, if part of the project involves building a RESTful API and you think that you're going to build out that whole data model in API and then you're going to show a Postman collection to your client, they're not going to be happy. I'm just letting you know regular people don't get that crap. So just don't even bother. You need to say, hey, I need these 3 endpoints to complete the login. I need these 3 endpoints to complete the next feature behind that. You build 6 endpoints, you build the front end, and you deploy it to a staging server, and you give a demo video, and then you say, hey, here's the link. There are amazing serverless tools for like links with Git branches. We've talked about Vercel. We've talked about Fly.io. If you're Rails, or another stack outside of Node, you need to be getting your client in the fray, in the build process. This makes them feel like they're part of it, but also it shows them the work being done as it's being done. And you're not doing a whole bunch of work that's just kind of behind a black box. They're hiring me because they're not technical and they don't want to see a Postman collection and be like, look at all this JSON coming back. Now all we got to do is build the whole UI. And guess what happens when you build that way? Your UI, as you're going down it, you start to realize the API needs to change. So all those endpoints you built are not working and they're stubbed out and you're using mock data and you're doing a whole bunch of other bad practices to try and show progress in the wrong way. So I haven't talked about estimation really at all, right? I've talked about a style of working. That's really what it's about. It's not about trying to get a crystal ball out and saying this will be done at this date. It's a style of working that brings the client into the process and keeps them involved throughout the entire process. You are going to find a lot better results because now it's not scope creep. It's crap, you just built that one little thing and I noticed the problem right away. Now the problems become easier to iterate on and fix as they're coming up. Instead of you getting a giant spreadsheet at the end of the project of 200 items that don't look like the design or didn't show up right, You've been working with them the whole time to get this thing right. And you're validating your assumptions as you go. You get users in early and often, which is the core tenet of behaving agile. But now you have a different challenge. Try selling that.
Right. I
Try
was just gonna.
selling no estimate. This was the real difficult part for you and I to learn because no matter, even now, even today, in the agile process, people still go, can you just tell me when that's going to be done? And for me, now some of this is solved by AI only temporarily. So don't get fooled. AI has solved this because the time to build has gotten so fast and so quick that the world hasn't adjusted its expectations to it yet. It will happen and you'll end up back in estimation land just using a faster vehicle. And you don't want to end up there because it doesn't change the core tenet of product development, which is we need to iteratively move through this and validate our assumptions and keep the user involved through that entire process. So now I'm going to flip the script a little bit here and say, how did we figure out how to sell it? Because that's how do you get around needing to put an RFP down? How do you get around this idea of like you need to put a date and a set of features and how do you get around that? How do you sell that?
Well, I'll tell you exactly how we do it. In our sales process, we sell, or rather build confidence in our methodology. We acknowledge the fact that there are others that may bid on the same project. And we basically pull like an 8 Mile from Eminem 8 Mile. And we basically just say, these are all of the things that are going to go wrong. You may have even experienced some of them. Just because you got some big lofty number of an estimation, call it 300,000 or whatever to build your project, does that really sit right with you? Like, do you really think that your all-in cost is 300,000? What if I told you that I could build it for a fraction of that? Same product, same goals. Essentially, the other estimates are saying, well, no matter what, you're in this for about 300,000 bucks, whatever. I'm just giving a round number. But how do you know that you have $300,000 worth of software? What if I told you that I could get you to your first dollar in a month, in 6 weeks, in 12 weeks, and it only costs you 30 grand? And so you and I are basically pulling 8 Mile, which is I'm selling against the idea that you're going to get other estimates the way that we know that they exist. And I'm going to say, hey, with us, you only need to think 1 month at a time. I don't need you to think about a $300,000 budget and the various milestones that we need to hit together. What I need you to think about is, after 1 month, am I the absolute best choice to partner with? If the answer is no at the end of that 1 month, you've only lost 1 month. You have a bunch of knowledge. I gave you a bunch of assets that are valuable to your project, and you can go your separate way. And so you and I have learned how to sell against this by not really selling our way. We sell against everybody else's way. And, I don't have to tell everybody who's watching, but it's working.
Well, I'll tell you why it works. In the best sales that we make often are people that have tried another agency and they're coming to us and they're saying, hey, it went horribly wrong. The software is a mess and nothing is working. And it was supposed to, I was paying $20 an hour and now I'm in this thing for 100 grand. Right. And they don't know how the heck that happened. They were like, it was supposed to be quick and easy and cheap. And I hired the lowest bidder. And then there's the other side is people who are getting bids. And I go, great, get 4 bids, bring them to me. They all have a wildly different number. Some have hours, some don't have hours, some have this, and I go, who's right? How do you pick who's right? Everybody's estimate was different. Nobody came back. It would be one thing if you interviewed 4 shops and they all came up with the same hours estimate for each feature, plus or minus
Right.
a day or two.
And
then
pick whoever you like.
and then you're choosing based on rate. No, they all come up with wildly different estimates of what this is going to be. And it shows me that they're just doing this, just a guess. So you realize that there's a guess, and then the other piece, right? You're building software. You are in this forever. If you're building a software company, you're never not going to hire engineers. This is never going to be your reality. You're never not going to employ an engineer or the agency that you're picking. So you have to pick a partner with a budget that you can sustain for the long term. So you need to think about that. And that comes back to the other piece of kind of scopes that I like to think about. There's time, there's money, and there's scope. when every project has these three things, right? How long is it going to take? How much is it going to be? And what are the things that we need to build? I find that projects go well if you fix one of those things. So if you're like only have 20 grand to spend, what I would say is let's look at the scope then, and let's look at the timeline. We have to be flexible on those things. Let's figure out what scope, what is the most valuable thing that we can get done for that 20 grand over this period of time, but give me some flex here, because sometimes I can shorten it, sometimes I can lengthen the timeline and say, hey, let's spread it out a little bit, because that's an option that a lot of folks with us take, but they don't realize they have, which is you want a part-time resource over a longer period of time so that we can take a cut, build a feature, and let you take it back to the users without you burning full-time budget the whole time, and move slower into market so that you can hit the point right and preserve that smaller budget. If you're sitting here going, hey, I have a timeline, we need this thing because there's an event coming up, well, then you got to be flexible on the budget and then the scope then. So we fix the cost, we fix the timeline. We're like, hey, it's got to be done by this date. Well, now I got to sit here and say, okay, well, now someone's got to be fully dedicated to this. I don't want them to think about any other projects at my agency, maybe even two people. And we got to talk more about bigger budget because we are going to need more senior resourcing. We're going to need, there's a whole bunch of different needs, to get that rush delivery. But at that point, you're flexing on two different points. My preferred thing for startups, though, is preserving your budget because money is your lifeblood. So I always say it's better to move slower and control your scope to try and get that proper MVP out over a longer period of time. Get a budget that you can sustain over a longer period so we can get it right. That's my preference anyway for the startup, estimation,
Right.
if you want to call it that. That's what I like to guide them into.
I also think that one of the things that we have done, which I see very different from a lot of other businesses, is we have productized the service model. We provide transparent public pricing. Like anybody wants to know what we charge per month, per product. It's on the website. And so it eliminates the guesswork. I don't have to really say how long is this project going to take. You talked about is something deadline driven. If something's deadline driven, has to launch hell or high water by this date, our model works great. You know exactly how many months that you can estimate. You know exactly how many. Now, here's where the ambiguity comes in. When we talk about a work stream in our month-to-month program, full tilt, dedicated team, we're really talking about a single hyper-talented individual dedicated, fully focused to one project. When other folks estimate it, their full tilt looks like a team of 20 from somewhere in the world, where the cumulative cost of those 20 individuals is the salary cost of our one hyper talented individual. So what I find very interesting is there is like a mechanical Turk aspect to people's software estimating when they're using wage exploitation, I guess you could say. And so how many bodies do you throw at a problem? You and me look at this differently. Most problems are not bigger than one body at the greenfield level. So at a brand new startup, it's not really a matter of getting a team of 4 or 5 people. There's not enough surface area for that. You need one hyper talented individual, in which case you know your costs.
Well, you need this multifunctional, what's being called now the forward deployed engineer, I think is in really what I describe it as is it's sort of a business analyst plus a designer plus an engineer in like one person. It's a person who really likes to build products end to end. They're good at design, especially in like the B2B tooling space, I would say. They're not trying to do any kind of, Webby award stuff. Nothing too art house is the word I like to use. They're very, very strong business analysts and they're very strong at coders. And this person is able to output a lot in a very short period of time. If you put 2 people on that are like this, it becomes really powerful. The problem is mythical man month going back to, the freaking 80s here. The more engineers you put on a problem, the slower you go. You'll find. And so at these shops, what happens is they start to get up against the deadline because they've committed to a deadline and they've committed to a budget. They start throwing bodies at it and things start going worse and costs start going up. And then you end up with this weird position as a client, which really stinks. And the stinky position that you find yourself in is, you know, your agency's losing money now, but you need them to finish your product. And it's not really advantageous to you to put them out of business. So then you end up you have two choices. Either you hold them to their contract until they say uncle or they claim bankruptcy, which they're not going to end up doing. They're going to tell you whatever, or you say, I'm going to pay you more money with the hope that you weren't off by that much.
Right.
But it ends up being that you were off by a lot because, again, you developed in this waterfall. Because the thing that happens is you present it to users and you realize the places then the change orders start to happen, and then which you're okay with. But if you had gotten those features in earlier and didn't operate in this design, hand off to developer, then go to users idea that you could do, you would have been in a much better place. And the idea that you could figure it all out in the design phase is not really doable either. You're not going to getting real users into the software is really the only way that you get proper user feedback on anything.
Well, here's also another contemplation, like raise your hand if you like issuing change orders to your customers. Raise your hand if you like having commercial level conversations with your stakeholders because your estimation was busted. You and I never have these discussions. Our discussions are really about velocity. How
not agile.
You want to move. You're not agile if you're asking for change orders, right?
If you have change order concept, it's not agile. Sorry, full stop. You are not operating an agile shop if there's such thing as change order. Agile means change.
It is possible that you're at odds in your business where your engineering team is fighting tooth and nail to remain agile. And by them being agile, you've creeped on your scope and you now need change order because you're out of budget. If your commercial model doesn't match your execution model, your business is at odds. What we have done is we've united the two. The commercial model only sells the development model. I don't like go off and make some random deal. Now, as we come to the end of this show, there are certain things that we can estimate. If I step to a V3 climb, I know I'm going to send it. Yes. You know, there are certain things, we'll call it a V3 climb. You come to me with like a one-page website, I'll do that for $2,500.
Landing page, WordPress, all that stuff. Yeah,
you need a simple business tool. You need a simple app. I know I'm going to nail it for 10 grand. Like, cool. I'll give you a flat rate. You'll have it in 6 weeks and cool. So like there is a piece to this practice after doing this for so long where I can relate it right back to how we started, which is in climbing. Certain things I can walk right up to and know I'm going to send it. No frustration, no injury, no problem at all. And I know for a fact I can bet my money on I'm going to get to the top of that. So we call those keeping the cars on the road when we take on a project where we know like, hey, there's a fixed budget. There's also a fixed timeline. No problem. I can make those types of things happen. But when we're talking about building software that's going to scale, software that's going to use external customers, external business customers, a software that you want to monetize, a software that you want investors on, a little bit of a different game. That's where we're talking about the model of selling agile and remaining agile in execution. This is the way that we operate our business. But there are exceptions to all of these things. Now, let me ask you a question, last one before we kind of close it up for today. When you're taking a look at a prospective opportunity that requires an estimation, I'm thinking RFP, large business RFP style, requires some type of like rubric, timelined, estimation. How long am I going to go for? What's my potential cost? And then what's going to happen. The recipient of the RFP is going to look at, 50 different submissions, and someone in the middle of that equation by reputation and dollar value is going to get selected. How we participate in those things occasionally. I don't really love the RFP process. I think they're while they're valuable, I think in a small business, I could spend all of my time doing RFPs and forget about everything else that this business has to do. But we do them, and they do happen occasionally. How do we provide estimate? You just did one the other day. How do we provide estimate in an accurate enough way where I know if I get that gig, I'm not going to completely shit the bed in either delivery or in commercial aspect?
Yeah, well, you just said it. Usually the RFP has to involve something or a component of piece, a grouping of things that I know that we've done before. Typically it's like a CRUD application that's, done in Rails. There's nothing super novel about it. That's for sure the only way. I would never RFP some like revolutionary startup technology, something that we haven't built before. So usually and a lot of times it's interesting. People are like, have you built for this vertical before? That's not really all that important. The vertical isn't all that important. It's really like an application of this type. Does this make sense? So that's one way that I'll typically look at it. The other way is looking at, I look at the opportunity sometimes long term. For that, someone once told us, shout out to Alex Benkendorf, who said, all money is made in risk. And sometimes I'm taking a ride. I have to understand my risk and understand, I love Alex Honnold's concept of risk versus consequence. If you guys have seen him climb the skyscraper, you may think to yourself, that's super risky. The reality is it's actually the same move over and over again. Is pretty straightforward for him. It's actually very low risk, very high consequence. Typically for an RFP, when I do this, I'm taking something that's low risk. It may be high consequence for me to get it wrong, but it's very low risk because I've done that type of thing before and I understand it really well. So I'm never going to put us at risk of losing money. And if I ever do, it's probably because I could do it myself. And I know that like I'll be the one that has to suffer for it and eat it if that happens. I usually look for something with long-term service contractability too, because that also allows you to very cleanly get from the build into service. And it's something longer term. It's something that they know right away. So you got to look for the right opportunities where they're looking for an RFP, kind of a 1-year budget, but they understand there's a year or two behind that. And so those are the RFPs that I like to participate in. Otherwise, I think there's a lot of RFPs out there that are really crappy and very low budget and they're just going to suck up time and they're going to put you in a very high risk, high consequence scenario, and you don't want to end up there.
The last little piece, as I'll leave us off for today, is going to be the title of this episode, which is Demos Over Deadlines. And it's probably the best piece of advice that we really ever got. Shout out to Eric Elliott. Wherever you are in the world, brother, like you helped shape our business and we appreciate you. And, I think demos over deadlines is the thing that we actually sell. And what I really love about our sales process, dude, because it's the two of us and whoever we meet on the other end of that call, it's us changing a state of mind. Whether they choose us or not, part of our journey, part of why we even created this podcast, the Stand Up, is to change the lens that people look through. And so if you approach your deals with the perspective of, I want to educate first, I want to build trust, I want to be, you said something a long time ago, the Anderson window experience, where like, even if I don't get the deal, even if you don't buy the windows, is there any doubt in your mind that I was the best damn window on the market? Is there any doubt in your mind that I was the best engineering team on the market? Whether you wanted me or afforded me is up to you. But I at least want to take the opportunity to build trust, build reputation, increase our surface area for luck, all the things that we all talk about, because the world's a small place. And in our experience, the best customers were burned in a previous life, a previous build, a previous project, and come to us to try something new, to try it a new way. And now all of a sudden they're successful having adopted a different model. And so I take this demos over deadlines concept. We speak this into reality on a daily basis. And my goal is to educate, not sell. And so when that education lands, it's a straight line method. There's no doubt that the customer wants to do it the way that we do it, because the other way feels too risky. Our way feels like maybe higher consequence, less risk. And so, dude, thanks for a great episode. This is why estimating software is a science in itself, but we have decided to create our own scientific method for this, and we call it Demos Over Deadlines.